my 1987 Toyota Fj60. Little background, this was actually a car that I used to go to basketball practice in. My best friend's parents bought it brand new out of New York, and we started hanging out back in elementary school, and I remember getting picked up from school in this thing, and actually when I graduated high school it needed a lot of work, and it was a gift. Gave it to me and asked me to fix it up, so I've spent the next 10 years going through the motor and transmission, doing all the mechanical stuff first, and I guess now I'm looking at doing some of the body work in the near future. So I guess if you want to take a look, I'll take you on a tour of it. Where I've spent the most work, if you want to start under the hood, do a little bit of talking about that. First thing I had to do was basically take apart the whole motor. So everything has been stripped down, it was blueprinted, and it started out with a 6-to-1 header. It always had a Toyota carburetor on it. Went with the Jim C mod. I'll show you the update. I went ahead and fuel injected it, but I started going for reliability. So we'll start with, as I said, the whole motor was rebuilt. Went ahead and desmogged it. Right off the bat, went ahead and just recently finished the Holly Sniper build. The thing is absolutely bomb-proof, just purrs like a kitten. So once that was done, I never liked how the 6-to-1 header worked. So I went ahead and got an Fj60 and milled out the 62 downpipes so that they would fit the Fj60 intake manifold. That was a whole process. Then I went ahead and stainless steel welded up a new Y pipe, nice high flow system through there. And since I figured I did one thing Fj62, I went ahead and, since I had the ability and the time, went ahead and did a Fj62 alternator, a little higher output. There's a couple great connections on the forum, folks that can make the adapter plugs. So really good mod, and you can still find Fj62 alternator parts around a whole lot easier than you can 60s. Another really interesting modification. So the brakes on this, my brake booster decided to go. So early Fj80 brake booster, a old T100 master brake cylinder, and then I went ahead and upgraded to the, arguably upgraded to the 4Runner brakes. But I can honestly say between the Fj80 booster, the bigger brakes up front, it brakes every bit as good as the Fj100 and the Fj80 that's back at the farm. So this thing drives with the EFI and the new brake setup and everything. It drives as reliably as my Tacoma. I'm kind of neurotic about what's going on in the motor compartment. So you can get these taller oil filters. Good thing to get, just more capacity. But you go ahead and do the Y pipe down here with the copper flange, and I have a mechanical oil gauge with the original Toyota sender on it. So my cluster on my dash still works, but is actually, come take a look, this is pretty cool. So I normally don't like cutting up Fj60 parts, but take a look in there. There's a really good spot for that 2-inch mechanical oil gauge. So if you have a broken insert right down there, I just have to get it to set the last little ½ inch, but that drops right in. So between the Sniper system, which is on a magnet right here, and the mechanical oil gauge, I have everything from vacuum pressure, block temperature at 2 different sending points. I have mechanical oil pressure as well as electrical oil pressure. So between the EFI and all the gauges, the dream is to take this thing from the Atlantic, probably around Chincoteague, and taking it out to like Portland, Oregon and back. So the last couple years have been reliability, serviceability, and just kind of really wanted to know what's going on with this thing while it's driving down the road. For a long time I've been buying Land Cruisers. It started with an Fj40 for $200 in the field. I've had probably, between my father and I, a dozen at this point. we found a Fj60 sitting out in the yard. It had this ARB bumper, it had the roof rack, it had a lot of the parts that brought this back to life. That was a $500 find 10 years ago. ARB bumper, the first generation, totally bomb-proof. The light force came from a pretty wild story. This guy had a Fj60 that he was turning into one of the Fj40 hybrids. It had a whole bunch of leftover parts, so this was found in a box in his garage. So yeah, the front end is just bomb-proof. The rear bumper, it's a funny story. Pretty avid fly fisherman, and I was up in New Hampshire, New York, doing a fly fishing trip, and I passed by this Land Cruiser graveyard basically, and basically saw this thing sitting on the ground with a whole bag of rusty bolts next to it. And it was something like 4 years later, I called up the guys, and sure enough, they had it still sitting there. So a little bit of work to get it cleaned up and back on. This is my 31. I'm working towards a full-size spare. I'm running 33-10-5 R15s. It's the poor man's overdrive, but with the EFI, the upgraded exhaust, the little bit of tweaking, the recurve dizzy, this thing really purrs. It has a lot of power, and the 33-10-5s, they're not wanting at all. So this is a 4-foot fire stick. Most important thing about it is that basically it needs to clear the roof in order to have a good 360 signal to throw in all directions. It'd be easy to put a shorter one on, but with it tucked back in there, it doesn't hit the body, doesn't hit the tire. Got pretty much a brand new interior off of a parts truck. The truck itself was totally rusted out, but somehow miraculously everything inside it was covered up in seat covers and was in beautiful condition. So this is actually an 85 Land Cruiser interior. It's a slightly darker color for the keen eye. Went with the center console, the Tuffy center console, with an Alpine unit in it. I went ahead and you can buy these really cheap Bluetooth senders. You don't need to go with the name brand, and you can wire those into any kind of head unit now. So heads up, phone, audio, all that stuff is now Bluetooth in this thing, but done really discreetly. I went ahead and moved it to the center console so that my CB could be in the dash. It's not too hard to modify the existing bracket to hold a smaller CB, and the Cobra 18WX ST is a really awesome unit. It fits in really well. It does everything I need it to, which is talking to people on the trail, and it has the weather bands, which is real important if you're actually doing any kind of long road trip. So probably one of the most significant things about this, when I was in South Africa, I had a carbureted 3F motor, an Fj62, and the thing was just totally reliable. So when I first started building this, I actually had a lot of international parts, and I was trying to make this like the African spec. And then I kind of realized that no matter what, it was going to be a US motor, so that's kind of why I went with a lot of experimental stuff. But one of the things that came out of it was probably one of the biggest things, I rebuilt the 2F first, and that was tear down, rebuild. I was really nervous to get into, at first, the transfer case because I had a small leak, and then I figured I'd gone that far that I'd go ahead and just rebuild the whole transmission. And basically using the parts that I had available in my bush garage in Africa, they told me I could do it with blocks of wood and a hammer, and that's what I did. So you can actually rebuild a Toyota transmission and transfer case with all at-home pieces. So one thing that you can't really show off, but it's probably one of the most important things. So I don't have a adjustable locker on the rear, but I do have a lunchbox up front. And what that is really useful for is I can undo the hubs, and I have my typical two-wheel drive turn radius. It handles on the road really well. But as soon as I lock this up and put it in four-wheel drive, the front end is actually lifting over things like sand and logs and stuff like that. So I've heard the argument of it's better to push than pull, but I like to think that that's actually creating a lot of lift to keep the front end up, the heaviest part on a cruiser. So I've had lockers up front before, and I just absolutely love them. Maybe eventually I'll get a locking rear, but I want to show one other cool mod to do if you have a lunchbox up front. what you'll run into is if you have a locker up front, you're going to lose your turn radius. Sometimes you need to be able to shut everything down, turn off the four-wheel drive, but you might still want your low range to crawl out of a spot. So I know it's all over the forum, but it's good to know. So normally you would have to go back to four-wheel drive and over to your low range. But what's really cool is if you take out a little bracket or you cut out a flange, you can actually go from 4 low to 2-wheel low. Comes in handy when towing sometimes. And you can put it right back into 2-wheel high. So you can actually make a full box. Went ahead and had a parts truck that had an old man Emu 3-inch left on it. Went ahead, pulled the packs, rebuilt them, repainted them. Paint didn't take, but as good a new old man Emu suspension just off the parts truck. From the Fj60 down pipes, the Y pipes are 2-inch into a 2.5. The 2.5 goes into a 2.5-inch Flowmaster high flow cat into a 2.5 in, 2.5 out Type 40, and then it's just a straight 2.5 back. Kind of a cool thing, you can get a 2.5-inch stainless steel exhaust out of a BMW and weld it up. So the only thing that's not stainless on this entire exhaust is this end piece here. Everything else is a hot rod BMW.